What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me are my two great co-hosts, Fede Perez and Ralph Hannah. And guys, here we are. It's July, and unfortunately, we are having a somber episode today because obviously we are speaking here literally the day after the first quarterfinal of the Copa America, where we saw Argentina beat Ecuador on penalties. But we won't be talking about Paraguay in these quarterfinals because unfortunately, Paraguay's trip in the Copa America only lasted a week, if that. And they will be going back home, or they've went home as they got eliminated in the group stage in their group with Colombia, Brazil, and Costa Rica, finishing all three games without a single win, 0 points. It's the worst Paraguay record that they've had in 99 years since 1925. It's the second time in the Copa America in the United States that they got eliminated in the group stage. And there's a lot to talk about here, really. I think certainly from a pessimistic point of view, everyone's really thinking of what's next for Paraguay. How are they going to bounce back from this, especially with the World Cup qualifiers happening in September? There's a lot of questions to be asked. And obviously, firstly, before we get into that conversation, I really want to thank everyone who's supported us during this Copa America. Myself and Ralph were at the games, at all three games for Paraguay. He was at the game against Colombia in Houston. I was at the game against Brazil, and also he was at the game against uh, Costa Rica in Austin. So obviously, thank you to everyone who has supported us during this time, even if the Paraguay national team hasn't been able to perform to the extent that we want them to be. And yeah, I mean it's somber days right as of recently all over Paraguay, all over Asuncion, Fede. I'm gonna go to you first, obviously, before we go into this shot, which I'm sure we have plenty to talk about with what we saw in those three games from the players from Dan Garnero and so on. But yeah, just your immediate thoughts. I mean, it sucks getting eliminated. It sucks. Like, we've been accustomed to seeing, for those that are of a certain age group, over the age of 20, 30, even more than that, we're accustomed to seeing Paraguay in the latter stages, winning games in the Copa America, especially given the format. But it sucks, man. It sucks not being, talking about a Paraguay team in the knockout stage. I really wanted everyone to go into that today, but yeah, yeah. I don't know what your feeling is right now, Fede. Good morning to you, and yeah, obviously everyone listening.
Hi, Roberto. Hi, Ralph. Hi to everyone listening. Like always, to Guarani Vision. It's great to be back after our three only games of the Copa America for our national team. I only have one thing to say. I'm very proud of our team. This team made me so proud, and I'm not talking about the other Roja. I'm talking about Guarani Vision. I'm talking about the coverage that you guys are doing. It was tremendous. I followed it obviously on X. I followed it on YouTube. I followed it on our platforms, but we're at with Guarani Vision. Tremendous presence there with at every stadium, even with Ralph going to different training grounds, Roberto going to Las Vegas. I want to know everything about that trip, Roberto. You got to tell me all the details about that trip, even though it was probably the worst game if we're going to talk about the three of them, because it was the 4-1 against Brazil, and it was the game that got us out of the competition also, right? It was the game that pretty much let us know that against Costa Rica, it was just get a win and let's get out of here at least. And we didn't even do that. So it was three very bad games. Obviously, people here in Paraguay are very angry at players, are very angry at how the team has been handled lately, also by board members, and just everything that we've been doing internally in the Paraguayan football, in the Paraguayan league. When you have something like this happening in a huge competition like this one, where all eyes are on your country, all eyes are on the national team, and you have so bad results, and it's not the first time it's happened. It's been happening lately in the last Copa Americas. It's been happening in the qualifiers for the World Cup. Also, we haven't had that feeling with the national team that we are a strong team, that we're going somewhere, and that's what people are feeling, also kind of frustrated. And it's been going on during these last couple of years, and we definitely got to talk about this situation. Where do we go from now? Because after three games, as far as we know right now, apparently our coach is going to leave the job, Daniel Garnero, after dropping everything in the Copa America, after doing pretty much everything wrong. And I don't know, let's try to find something good out of this situation. Maybe there are a couple of positive things that Garnero leaves in this team, but we gotta talk about everything, Roberto, from the locker room, from what's happened on the ground, in the stands. Obviously, look at it from every single point of view.
Yeah, and I actually want to go on to that first from Ralph because he was at the majority of the three games. Obviously, we'll talk about my experience in Vegas, but yeah, I wanted to ask you, Ralph, first. Well, first of all, good morning. But yeah, just your experience of being able to obviously be credentialed to be at the events, to be at the games, to see the fans. Obviously, I've had the privilege of going to multiple Copa Americas in the past, and I've always enjoyed it, regardless of how the performances that have been. I mean, certainly the way that perhaps the Copa America has been trying to been organized in the United States, has been trying to get as many fans as possible. It hasn't been perfect, but no tournament is. But yeah, just your overall thoughts, I guess, now as you wrap towards the end of your Copa America coverage, not just of the Paraguay games, but also just being in the in the mood, or I guess in those areas where you had Paraguayan fans and fans of other countries as well.
Yeah, hi Roberto, hi Fede, everybody watching and listening. Yeah, I've finished now my Copa America coverage. I did the Argentina Ecuador game last night, which was the best of the of the four matches I went to, or the five I went to, I think. I mean, it's been very interesting. One thing is, of course, playing these games in NFL stadiums. Apart from the match in Austin, I was at the Energy. I think that was quite interesting for the teams because not no like the pitch at the Energy Stadium, like from the Jamaica players, from Paraguay and Colombia when they played there. Argentina last night, Messi was telling us the same thing that the pitch didn't help. So that was one big factor, I think, that a lot of people are talking about. Also, that the pitches themselves are on regulation size, but we got some really good crowds in a lot of games. So the Colombia Paraguay game was great. If you're a Colombia fan, they came down en masse. It was a really like party atmosphere, especially because then they got the result and they beat us last night as well. I mean, the Argentina fans, there were so many from everywhere. Everybody is a Messi fan, even the Americans. That like I found one guy with a Maradona shirt doing the hand of God, and he was an American guy that just wanted to be at the game. So I mean, I think in that sense, it's been really good fun. And then talking directly about Paraguay, and yeah, with the team, I was closer to probably more to Garnero in the press conferences and the team themselves. Garnero was a man that looked defiant in the first press conference pre-Colombia and post-Colombia. Even he didn't feel things were that bad, but by the end he just seemed kind of resigned to it, and I'm not surprised with the news that he could be leaving, because I think he felt that in that final press conference in Austin, it was a small dark room. There weren't very many of us, and as he walked off into the tunnel, into the darkness, he kind of felt that was maybe his last moment there. And for the players, at times they've been very relaxed, but they have never been together. That's one thing I've noticed, especially following Argentina yesterday and looking at the world champions as a team that play together, kind of play for each other on the pitch. You know, Messi misses a penalty, but then Dibu saves two, and they're just always kind of there with each other. And even the way they walk out at the end, they're all kind of hugging each other, arms around. Paraguay is not quite the same as like little cliques of players and little groups, and I think that was Garnero's biggest failure, is that he couldn't get that group together in all the time he's had, because the Copa America, they had plenty of time to work on that together.
Yeah, I mean, Fed, I want you to jump in real quick before we go into the games, but I think that's so important to what Ralph was saying. And obviously, from what you were able to hear from like the rumors of possible bust stops, or just, this kind of negative energy that is happening within the team, even from what we've heard. It's obviously our information of what we've heard, that obviously when Garnetto finished his team talk after the last game, he just said, he doesn't know if he's coming back. So you might as well solve it within yourselves. But even then, you think to yourself, can they solve it within themselves? They couldn't even solve them with themselves in three games. How do you expect them to solve it after? I mean, we'll go into that later about the future and everything. But just yeah, I think Ralph is right. It's just throughout these three games, you saw it from the pre games, from the post match, and during the games, you didn't see this sort of unity, and you just saw a bunch of individuals just trying to do it as themselves and just say, you know what, F it, I'm just gonna do it myself, and I'm just gonna do it my way without any help.
Yeah, Garnero took some serious decisions also in that locker room, guys. I mean, to sit down our captain, Gustavo Gomez, that was probably one of the biggest decisions he made going forward into this Copa America. The other one was probably change the goalkeeper, which was probably a big surprise to a lot of people. I mean, Carlos Coronel had been in that goal position ever since Garnero took over, and to give the role to a very young goalkeeper who had just had his first games in the local league like Rodrigo Mourinho is just like you feel like you burnt another player, right? I mean, look at how many goals he had to suffer, and it's pretty much been that situation for every player that has been coming into this team. I mean, you can't get a team going, and I'm sorry, but I mentioned this before the competition. I said I wanted to see these guys be brothers out there. I wanted to see them be hugging. I wanted to see that, and you could see that it wasn't like that. The team was not together, just like Ralph was saying. Maybe it was a couple of players doing that situation, or maybe because of age difference also. I mean, I didn't see that leadership from the old players to the young ones that were just playing their first games also under this shirt. I mean, there was a lot of players that were just that they didn't have the pressure under their shoulders because they haven't lived it lately. But there were other players that were being kind of left out of the team because they haven't showed up in big games, like Junior Alonso, Gustavo Gomez, all the ones that were in the bench pretty much in those first games. I mean, there was a big change that Garnero tried to do in these 3 games. But if you don't get the results, if you don't lift up the team spirit, and if you don't get things going with the public also, because he never got the fans by their side either. I mean, the fans were not rooting for this team. We're not rooting for these players when we headed into that Colombia game. But let's go game by game, Roberto. Let's talk about the players that he used, what he tried to do also in every game, because it was kind of weird in the sense of the team that he tried to build, and even the players that he eventually used. A lot of players from Libertad. That's something that a lot of people also criticized.
Yeah, and then we'll start off first with the first game against Colombia in Houston. Ralph, obviously you were there, and I think the biggest thing that we had, at the start was that after the 3 friendlies that we saw from Paraguay, where Carlos Coronel started in goal, it was Rodrigo Morínigo that got the start, and he eventually obviously started the entire game. I mean, obviously we've been watching football for quite some time, but I don't recall unless it was like a sudden injury or like a really bad of form dip of form that a goalkeeper makes his international debut in international tournament. So you kind of felt, and I'm sure you kind of had that suspicion when you got into the Energy Stadium that day, and obviously what happened afterwards. You start and you think to yourself, is this gonna work? Are you really gonna give a kid, in quotations, a kid, getting his first tryout and getting his first chance at a national team against a team that didn't lose in 20 odd games in an international tournament? It just felt like very odd from the get go.
Yeah, there are a couple of strange decisions, I think, for the Colombia game specifically. One's Morínigo, because the one thing about Morínigo is he's not very good with his feet. Carlos Coronel is not great with his feet either, but it immediately gave Paraguay like a bit of a problem in terms of Colombia's very high, intense pressing when they want to. And I remember several times that Morínigo just had to go long and kick the ball back to them because they were basically unable to kind of deal with what was going on. So that was interesting that happened. And then also the the fact that Caballero starts that game, right? It's talking about these Libertad players. Ernesto Caballero's a guy that he's about 30, 31 years old. He's never left Paraguay, or if he has, I think he's only been as far as Argentina. So he's never been international quality. He's just become very good at what he does in that holding role in the local league. But to put him in the game against Colombia is, of course, very, very difficult to try and find some kind of level which he's never had in his career. And it was pretty obvious that while defensively the structure of Paraguay wasn't terrible, it was okay, but they just weren't able to get anything moving or going forward because Caballero's not the kind of player that's going to start like moving the ball around and doing little passes, and then you can try and break the line. And so Paraguay were very static. And although they did defend quite well for, I think it's like 30 minutes until that first goal, the Munoz goal, you never thought like, oh, Paraguay's going to do something here. It was just like they're just waiting for Colombia to attack, and eventually the dam burst and they concede those 2 goals before halftime, and pretty much the game's over. And this is a story, as we tell this story, is going to go on and on, right? The second half, Paraguay picked up. So I don't know. I'll pass on to Fede if he wants to talk about maybe the second half and how things started to get a bit better with a couple of changes.
Yeah, I just wanted to go into that. Obviously, both goals came from literally the same play, you would say. James Rodriguez feeding a ball into both these players' heads. It was Munoz for the first goal and then Lerma for the second. The second half, you saw Enciso come in. He scored his first ever international goal for Paraguay. It was an assist from Ramon Sosa, who was coming off the bench, replacing someone who's been relatively poor, I would say, in the entire tournament, Almiron. But, and of course, eventually Sosa would have I'd say, the better tournament out of all the players that were on there. But yeah, it was a game where we thought, and this is a repeating task for all three games, where in the second half they got better because they scored. In all three games, they scored in the second half, but in the first half, it just completely self-destructed after a really good start in quotations.
I think the biggest thing in the second half was probably Ramon Sosa coming in, guys. I mean, I think that was something that Garnero should have done from the get-go. And I think eventually with the passing of the first and second game, he kind of realized that, because they asked him into that third game, hey, what happened with Ramon Sosa? Why he didn't play as much as people would have wanted him to play? And he didn't have a response for that. And in this game against Colombia, he had that effect. I mean, you saw that he came in for Miguel Almiron and he was much better. And let's not forget, guys, I mean, Miguel Almiron had a huge opportunity in the first half to score a goal, and we weren't going to get that many against Colombia. And yeah, it was Julio Ciso coming through, at least to put a bit of suspense in the game, to have that opportunity of going forward. But we never got that. We never felt like we were going in top of Colombia. I mean, I even thought that they kind of gave us the ball in the second half, or we didn't really take it away from them. I mean, if they wanted the ball, they were going to have it, because they were a much better team in that sense. They are a possession team, and we built a midfield to get the ball away from them, to be aggressive. And Garnero didn't get that. I mean, he was always trying out that third midfielder, and he never found that missing piece. He never found that Diego Gomez that was missing in this squad, right? I mean, he was injured. He wanted to have him in this Copa America. He waited until he could to have him in the roster. That's why I think Richard Sanchez was a player that was always benched. I mean, he was never programmed to be in this squad. I think he was even going to be cut. But something that did catch my eye was Fabricio Peralta. Why not use him after what he did going into the Olympics? I mean, that's a kid that you could have built in this Copa America, give him the opportunity, and you didn't do that. I mean, you gave him barely minutes in the friendlies. He did go with Damian Bobadilla, which is a player that ended up playing a lot. I mentioned his name before the competition, and it actually surprised me how much he ended up using him even over Matias Rojas, which was a player that you thought was coming in hot after what we've seen from him in Inter Miami in his first days. But he didn't end up using these players. And let's not even mention Kaku or other midfielders. I mean, this coach just went with the players that he thought were under his wings, that were gonna show him certain, that they were going to do the task out there. That's why he went with Ernesto Caballero. That's why he went with Matias Espinosa. That's why he brought a lot of Libertad players. And that's why the best player in this team was probably Julio Enciso, because nobody knows better Julio Enciso than Garnero. I mean, this is the coach that put him in the first division. This is the team that built him to be the European player that Julio Enciso has become lately. And Julio Enciso, after this first game, he felt that he could have done more. He's always feeling that he can do more for the team, but we need a team player. We don't need a Julio Enciso to do everything. We need him to play with the rest of the players. And that's when after this game, you saw that, are we building a team around Julio Enciso? Is Julio Enciso trying to take over, because he was coming into that midfield and picking up the ball? I mean, he was trying to be all over the place, and that's not a team player. We need players to do things for the team. But if I'm going to look at the bright point, guys, especially in this Colombia game, I mean, Andres Cubas played his ass off in this game again. I mean, every time we've seen him in these games, even in the friendlies, in all three of the games, I mean, Andres Cubas was probably the bright point. He wasn't in the last game against Costa Rica, but in the two games that he played in this Copa America, I think that's the player to build around in the midfield. But yeah, there were a lot of decisions being made before the competition, and that was probably not good for the confidence of the players. I mean, Carlos Coronel, Gustavo Gomez, watching the game from the bench and knowing that it was a decision made by the coach. I don't know if they knew about this heading into the training, before the competition. I don't know when this decision was made, but it had to affect clearly the day to day, and it had to affect the locker room. I mean, you can't just take the captain away and put him and not give him any minutes. There are even rumors that there were a couple of fights in the locker room. You don't know really what's going on doors in, Roberto, but if you start losing and if you can pick up and if the coach makes these kind of decisions and he doesn't get the results, I mean, players are not going to be silent about the situation. There was a lot of argument and players not showing up, like Almiron, like players that you thought were going to take the chance, and no, we've just been waiting and waiting on certain players.
Yeah, and remember that Julio Enciso is at fault for both the goals in a way. So because I had asked before the game where's his favorite position where he's gonna go, and he ends up like kind of on the left in that first half, and so it's his side where Munoz is free and Munoz scores. But then you can't really expect Julio Enciso to be a very defensive player. That said, he then does start tracking back, and he gives away the free kick that James Rodriguez puts in for the Lerma goal. So essentially, he's kind of at fault for those two goals. Afterwards, I spoke to Garnero about that, and I said, well, what's the idea with him? Because you can't use him too defensively, but then he's kind of everywhere doing what he wants. And he said he had libertad. He said he had freedom in attack. And so we saw that more and more, I think, as the tournament went on, that Julian Cesar was just going to do his own thing. And I think, from what I understand, I don't think that was him deciding this for himself. That was him being given the freedom to do that. And maybe if we want to talk about it, that's really what affected, for me, Alex Arce and Adam Barreiro. Because those guys who were both used... Sorry, Roberto, you want to jump in, right?
No, go ahead. No, I was gonna jump in for the second game, but yeah, go on and continue.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Arce is used for the Brazil game again, having played against Colombia, and then Barreiro comes in Costa Rica. But both of those guys, you will see, they spend very little time in the penalty area. And it's because they're having to defend. They're without the ball, they're actually the ones defending because Julian Cesar isn't doing that.
It's a very frustrating performance, you would say. And now heading into the second game, after we saw Brazil draw Costa Rica in their first game, I think given the performances that we saw against Colombia, maybe people thought, okay, maybe we can probably do something. And it was a good start. It was a good start. You did see, obviously, a few changes in this one. You saw Damian Bobadilla get the start. It was the same team that started the Colombia game, but it was with one change. It was Damian Bobadilla getting the nod over Ernesto Caballero. But obviously after a good start, I can even recall being in Vegas where it wasn't as full as what we saw in Houston, but obviously it was a lot of Brazilians, a lot of Paraguayans also came to this one, Fede, for this game in particular, because I think it was in Vegas, it was against Brazil. I think it was a good scene going on there, and I think there was this kind of optimism that after what we saw from Brazil, you think, okay, maybe something can be done. Obviously, there was a penalty right at the beginning where Lucas Paqueta had missed, which gave some hope to Paraguay, but then ultimately it all fell down. And Vinny Jr. did his thing. He was able to be so crucial with 2 goals before the half. Savio getting the goal right before halftime. It ended up 4-1, of course. Paqueta got his redemption with this penalty. But we saw Omar Alderete, also one of the better players from this Paraguay squad, scored a really fantastic goal from outside the box. None of the strikers were able to do something, so it was a defender that was able to get it. But yeah, we saw some of the same mistakes. I think Gustavo Velasquez was getting absolutely smoked by Vinicius Jr. on the fullback position. I think you also saw, again, a very isolated forward line with Enciso kind of trying to do his own thing, and it's not working on that end as well. So yeah, and obviously this was the game that ultimately decided the elimination for Paraguay in the tournament because they knew that if they had gotten a second straight loss, they would have been out of the tournament. So yeah, this was the one that I think was the most disappointing of the three, and I want to go to Fede on this one because certainly you saw also someone like Andres Cubas, who again, like you said, had a really good game in the first game. He got sent off in the 81st minute and, obviously couldn't play the last game. But, this was the game where everything went wrong and it all collapsed. And you even saw the players like Ramon Sosa getting 12 minutes in this game. 12 minutes he only got in the game against Brazil. Caco Romero very played sporadically as well. He got 18 minutes. And yeah, this was just a game where it just everything went wrong on my end.
So many mistakes in defense in this game, guys, right? I mean, talk about that situation. I mean, yeah, obviously when you play against Brazil, defensively, you have to have a perfect game, and we were very far away from that situation. I mean, every defender from Gustavo Velasquez being out dribbled by Vinicius Jr. I mean, there's a lot of pictures on social media where you see Vinicius Jr. pretty much doing circus stuff on Gustavo Velasquez. I mean, that was shameful. But I mean, I'm not gonna go off on Gustavo Velasquez. He didn't have the help he needed. When you're gonna try to stop a player of the caliber of Messi, of Vinicius Jr., when you have to go up against Cristiano Ronaldo, you need your teammates to help you out. You can't do it on your own, especially when you're a center back and you're not a right back and you're put on that position because you're supposed to be strong, and you could see that he was outplayed really by one of the best players in the world, and that was a big factor, I believe, into the planning of this game. Also, I mean, look, you were going to play against Colombia, you were going to play against Brazil. There were a couple of things you needed to stop: Luis Diaz against Colombia and Vinicius Jr. against Brazil. Those were things you needed to train before the Copa America, and those are things that we weren't able to do perform well in the Copa America. We didn't do those tasks in the game, and then you had the problems with the center backs also. I mean, that second goal where Alderete tries to stop the ball, and the goalkeeper doesn't go forward, doesn't do anything, doesn't react, and we pretty much give them the second goal, and it was just a meltdown from there, guys. And we've seen this before also. I mean, ever since we get a goal on our sheet, we try to react, but you can see that this team is not going to come back. And that's something I mentioned also before. You needed that spirit, you needed that fight in these guys, and we didn't see that. But this is the game that really threw me off from Daniel Garnero. I mean, the coach. I mean, talk about let's do something in the second half, and what kind of subs did he use? Yeah, this is where I'm not with Daniel Garnero. I mean, putting Nestor Jimenez in the game, Ramon Sosa, he gave him only, I believe, 12 minutes in this game after he had an assist in the first game against Colombia. He was the best player that linked up with Julio Enciso. You could see that Julio was just frustrated because he couldn't pull this team forward, and Brazil just grew and grew during the match. I mean, obviously, once Brazil gets 2-3, they start having fun. They start getting the ball away from you, and it just looked ugly, Roberto. To be honest with you guys, I don't know. I don't think I saw much of those last 15 minutes. I mean, I was just looking away. I didn't want to see this game anymore. I don't know how you didn't leave the stadium, Roberto.
I kind of checked out as well. And, the Alderete goal, I think that was one of the few times I haven't celebrated a Paraguay goal, which, I always tend to. But this one was just like, oh, he scored, even though it was a fantastic goal. But I was just like, at that point, I'm just like, what the hell? Like, what's going on? And Ralph, I'm sure you looking on TV in this one, I think you kind of did see just the Paraguay team just give up after the fourth Brazil goal, the third goal, I'd say, where obviously the mistake came from Alderete playing the ball back to Morigo and then Vinny scoring the third goal.
Yes, I mean, the worst defeat in the Copa America against Brazil since Pelé scored a hat-trick in 1959 when they're world champions. I mean, and this team is not as good as the Pelé and Garincha team that played us back then. So it was definitely, yeah, a combination of these crazy errors, right? I think Espinosa has a really bad error as well in the game, and then Garnero setting up the team just totally wrong. And I think here is where I did say this before. Garnero got the job, and he's done this in Copa Libertadores. He can be very stubborn, and he wants to look at his team, and he wants to be on the front foot. But you have to accept the reality that you are not going to go toe-to-toe with Brazil and beat them, right? Just like Libertad is not going to do that with a Brazilian team in Copa Libertadores. And so Paraguay almost went toe-to-toe. If you look at possession stats, it's almost 50-50. I think Paraguay's like ends up 46%. And also those first 30 minutes, it's like Paraguay has a shot. They have a shot. Paraguay comes back. And so it's like the game's kind of a bit end to end. The difference being that Paraguay doesn't have somebody that's going to always score a goal, whereas Brazil have so many weapons in attack that could do some damage. Then there's the big moment we haven't talked about yet, is Paqueta's missed penalty. So on 30 minutes, Paraguay's just had a good chance. I think Bobadilla was doing well and getting into the box and having some chances.
He had a shot on target. He actually had a shot on target right before that penalty.
Right, just before the penalty, right? And so then with the penalty, you think, okay, well, we're seeing the Colombia game again. Paqueta misses, and that should be the moment as a team to lift yourselves up, right? I saw the same thing, by the way. I went to the Mexico-Jamaica game. Mexico were very poor for the whole game. Jamaica score, the goal's disallowed, and that disallowed goal like lifts Mexico and they go on to win the game. And for Paraguay, it was like almost like the opposite. They just didn't, I don't know, they didn't unite in that moment. And then you have the catastrophe of the 3 goals in 10 minutes, which 2 of them are mistakes, and that ends the game right there. And then finally, just to Fede's point about the substitutions, yeah, I just couldn't believe that if you're losing 4-1 and you don't make a sub until 73 minutes, that's rare. I mean, you have to do something at halftime. At least they came out and scored early on with Alderete, but really you should have been making changes at halftime because it's not good enough to be 3-0 down. And as a coach, you have to do something with the group on the team on the field by telling them that, making changes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it was really a performance that, everything went wrong for Paraguay, and obviously that ultimately ended their campaign at the Copa America very early, which sucks because I think they could have done more if they had, like I said, if they performed in the second half that they did in comparison to the first half, they would have had a much better team. So what that meant was that at least Paraguay would go into the final game, playing for honor, and certainly Paraguay teams, they tend to always play those games with honors with a little bit more fire in their in their shirts. And ultimately we saw an entirely different team as well. Obviously, you didn't, like you said, didn't get a minute from Gustavo Gomez at all, or Junior Alonso at the end as they took on Costa Rica. And yeah, this one was another game that just went so bad, Ralph. I mean, obviously within the first few minutes, think about that, first 7 minutes, Costa Rica it was already 2-0 up. And from there on, it was just a team that, it kept trying to push and push. Obviously, Sosa got the goal, his first international goal as well. It's a really good ball from Villasanti that played Sosa to score. But that start, I mean, I think that was the worst of the 3. I mean, obviously, the performances-wise was from Brazil, but to concede 2 goals to a Costa Rica side that were practically already eliminated as well. I mean, there was some hope that if they had scored a couple more, they probably would have qualified or had a chance, but how can you possibly concede 2 goals in 7 minutes? Like, how can you do that?
No, it was awful. The first goal is like I think one of the Costa Rica players does like this back heel or like this. I don't know, like he somehow keeps the ball in play, and suddenly Paraguay like, oh, when nobody's restructured because we thought we cleared the corner, we hadn't. Calvo stays up, the captain, and he heads in. And it's like, okay, this is a bit of a mess, but just fix yourselves up. The second goal is embarrassing because, again, Almiron, he's just been so poor in this tournament. He just lets Alcocer run past him. He's not getting back. I think it's maybe, I can't remember if it's Bobadilla is also thinking, oh, well, Almiron's got him here, but he hasn't. And then the defense are like, we've got this guy bearing down on us. We don't know what to do because we've given him too much space. He shoots from a long distance, and Morinigo should save that, right? I mean, that shot wasn't that strong. It's from very far out, and that's the first time you think, Morinigo, hold on, you're not at the kind of standard we need here, because he hasn't really. We talked about Morinigo being picked. He wasn't really at fault for any of the other goals, but I think that one particularly is on him. And then, I mean, after that, Paraguay dominate the whole game. They have chance after chance after chance, and they almost equalized at the very end. I think Angel Romero and Sequeira from Costa Rica makes a great save. But it was one of those games where it's too late. You at 2-0 down to a Gustavo Alfaro team, you're kind of done, right? He doesn't even set up his team to score 2 goals. They probably didn't know what to do at that point. And it was, again, Ramon Sosa and Julian Cesar with the 2 bright points in attack, those two playing together. And it did make you wonder, shouldn't they have started every game together? But like I say, that second goal was poor. And Almiron gets taken off at halftime. Talking about changes, this time he's off at halftime because he was poor. And I'll say something. I saw the training the day before. They only give you first 15 minutes, but he didn't make a pass. He didn't control the ball in that training. He was either taking it very lightly, he was carrying an injury, or he just didn't care. But Almiron was like not at even concentrating in training. Obviously, it was the first 15 minutes. We don't see the full thing, but you could just see the like kind of attitude wasn't there.
Low on confidence. That's all you could really say. Low on confidence, and I would expect as well that given the reaction given to Paraguayans who have been frustrating by his performances for a while. I mean, he was getting absolutely killed on social media as being a player who, oh, he's playing in the Premier League, he's doing so well. Yet when he puts Paraguay shirt in, it's too much for him.
He was getting killed on the pitch. Let's be honest. I mean,
Oh, that too.
He wasn't at the standard, right? In
exactly.
any of those games.
It was a shame to see that Miguel Almiron, guys. I mean, he never went to being that Miguel Almiron from Atlanta United ever again, I believe. I mean, he never showed that version, even in the European football. I mean, maybe just a couple of sparks here and there, but he was never constantly that player that Newcastle went and looked for, the one that they spent so much money for. That's why they want to let him go now, because they need the money, they need the budget, they need to sell him to make the money so they can bring in other players, because Miguel Almiron is not going to show up there anymore. They're done with him, just like a lot of people are feeling the same in the national team. And it was before even this Copa America that a lot of people wanted to sit him down, and I was one of them. I was one of the people that said, let's sit some of these players in the bench, but hey, we can still use them properly. Gustavo Gomez, you could have used him in this last game against Costa Rica. I thought the defense was really tired. I was really surprised about, using the same 6, 7, 8 guys, I believe it was, from the first two games that we saw. I mean, you had other players to give the opportunities, but no, Garnero insisted in certain players, especially in defense. And I thought Gustavo Velasquez was just really tired. I thought Alderete was just really frustrated, even though he was kind of that flag out there in the defense. He had already made his decision with Fabian Balbuena, so Fabian Balbuena had to play no matter what. But these guys, you could tell that, they weren't ready for a game like this one, and they were really hit by what had happened against Brazil. And I'm not even going to say a word about Nestor Jimenez. I don't want to say anything about Ernesto Caballero, but because they were the ones chosen by Daniel Garnero, he's the one that really put them on the spotlight. It's not them, just like Rodrigo Mourinho. I mean, these guys don't have the level yet for the national team. These guys need to leave the country. They need to play in a better league, and then they need to really earn a spot in the national team. That's what I believe, just like Gustavo Velasquez did. I mean, Gustavo Velasquez is playing great. He's one of the leaders in Newell's. I mean, nobody was surprised to see that leadership that you see in Newell's Old Boys in Argentina take it now to the national team. But you don't see that in Ernesto Caballero and Nestor Jimenez in Libertad. They're not that kind of players, and they have never made a difference either in the international competitions. I mean, in Libertadores and Sudamericana, there never been those players that made the difference that you could take to the national team. That's just on that. But going back to Miguel Almiron, I mean, why use them on 3 games, Roberto? I mean, having Ramon Sosa, having other players that you could have used. I mean, Daniel Garnero was just stubborn on this situation, especially if Ralph saw it only watching 10 minutes of the practice. And you probably saw it also, Roberto, because you were down there in the lobby. You saw the players taking pictures with people, and you could see that Miguel Almiron is clearly affected by everything that's happened along his career with the national team. And he needed, I believe, some. I think they needed to take care of him and maybe use him as a sub, give an opportunity to a young player. And it was not his time. I mean, his time has already passed, and I don't think we're going to see the Miguel Almiron we expected it to see in the national team. I think that episode, in the way I see football, is totally over. I don't think we're ever going to see the best version of this player.
Yeah, I mean, he's 30 years old now, so you think if not now, when? When other players are trying to step up and take your position and your spot, like an Enciso, like a Ramon Sosa. I'm sure there's other players out there, but yeah, Ralph, I think, for what we saw with Gustavo Gomez, and I think it's gonna happen the same with Almiron, and I want to go into now what we go next, because certainly, obviously, all the attention will be, okay, who's gonna come in? Because all the talk is that Danny Arnetta will indeed leave the position. He will go on again, and a third coach in 10 months. And you're still in the middle of a qualifying position in the qualifiers where you're technically still in it. You're technically in the position. If the qualifiers ended now, they would be in the spot for the playoff. But I don't know how this sort of instability will help Paraguay on the long term. They had to play Uruguay away and against Brazil at home in September. Those are the next competitive games that Paraguay will play. But with another manager, and all the talk has been one Carlos Salier, who is going to lead a Paraguay team, a really decimated Paraguay team, by the way, with no overage players for the Olympics in Paris. You just think to yourself, how are we going to go ahead from here? What's next? It's a tough question to ask, Ralph, and I'm sure for Fede, also for you, it's a tough one. But what is next?
Well, the first is that you can't put all of this on Garnero. I mean, we've talked about quite a few of his mistakes, but one thing Garnero did do, if you want a positive, he got Paraguay scoring goals again, which is something they couldn't seem to do previously. And what you just mentioned, there's been 3 coaches in 10 months or whatever it is. It just is the group of players is more is as much as the problem as whoever the coach is. And you can see from the second half performances that as a group, when they want to play, they're actually quite good. So, you have quite good players here. We're talking about in the Premier League, and you have a La Liga defender in Alderete. There are some good players here, but there's none of that unity. I think if I was Harrison or Gusto Villar now and thinking about the new coach, I would just look at 3 players and I would say Julian Ciso, Ramon Sosa, Diego Gomez, because they're your 3 best players. And I say, who do you guys want? Who are you going to work with? Who are you going to do? And try and get someone that they will work with, because otherwise you're just going to be in the same problem again. If they get a manager and Julio Enciso doesn't like him, you've seen already, Enciso's going to do what he wants. You can't drop him because he's by far the best player. And I think he realizes that, right? I think he was there, like he won the most duels against Costa Rica. Like, he's not even a defensive midfielder, but he can do everything if he wants to. And so he knows he's like at a level above everybody on that pitch. And so really you need to get someone that can get the best out of him. Now, if Garnero, who gave him his debut, wasn't that person, then who is it going to be? I mean, it's a tough question. Paris Aguirre for me is just like a temporary thing. He's 73. I mean, he hadn't coached for 4 years until he picked up the Olympic team. So maybe he gets Paraguay through the qualifiers, but would he even be at the World Cup? So I don't know. I'm honestly not sure where Paraguay can go next.
Who wants to come to Paraguay and manage this team, guys? That's a huge one also. I mean, you can go around the globe trying to get a coach, and I don't know if you're going to have that many saying, yeah, I want the job. I'll go no matter what. I mean, look at this team as of right now. I mean, this is not a winning team. This is a team where you need to build that bond in the locker room again. Probably leave a lot of players that were in this squad out of the next process also. I mean, you're going to have to make a cut in this list. I mean, between those young players that Ralph was mentioning and the experienced players, or what what's going to be their contribution going forward, especially because that's what I didn't really understand of what Garnero really did try to do in this Copa America, right? So it's either go with the young players and bring, I don't know, maybe an experienced, even old manager that has done it already in the qualifiers, that's not going to be surprised about, going up against the very experienced managers that we have in the qualifiers, or are you going to go with a young manager again, maybe somebody that has been in the local league lately and it's maybe somewhere else? I mean, I really don't know where the FA is going to go now, looking for that kind of manager that we need. It's a very, very hard decision. I would like for Garnero to show at least something in this Copa America so he could have moved forward, because he made some very strong decisions in that locker room that I don't know if they're going to stay with the new manager. So as of right now, I really have no idea who can manage this team, Roberto. To be honest with you, you can bring Guardiola right now and no guarantees.
Yeah, and I think there's a big disconnect between what the fans want and probably what the players want. Because a lot of the fans are saying Julio Cesar Cáceres. Why? Because he went to World Cups. He's an ex-player. He won a title with Olympia. He's doing okay at Buqueño. But I don't think the players want that, because remember what Almiron said after the last Copa America in 2021. And he didn't like any of the old generation. That for the players, that's a big, like, what's the word? It's like a weight on their shoulders for a lot of them. So I don't know if they would respond, because I think the fans think, oh, let's get like someone who knows what it is to win with Paraguay, like a guy like from that generation. But I don't know if the players react to that. So then it's like, do we go outside again probably to Argentina, because that seems to be where all the good coaches are coming from. Look at the Copa America, 4 Argentinian coaches won their groups. But yeah, like Fede saying, who really wants to come? Does Gallardo want to come? No, probably not. Let's be honest. He's got better things he can be doing. So I don't know who you would find that can get this group together. But it has to be somebody that can connect with Enciso, with Sosa, and with Diego Gomez. I think that's going to be key.
And what's going to be the goal, guys? Is it going to be to qualify for this next World Cup where so many teams are going to go? Is it looking forward to 2030? What's the project going to be like? Because lately, every coach that gets this team has it for a very short period of time. I mean, there's no guarantees in this team, Roberto. If you're the manager coming in, you know that you're going to get a bad team and you don't know how long the job you're going to get.
Well, I mean, I guess you have no choice, really. I mean, if you're technically still in the position to do so, you still have to fight what's out there. And I think a lot of these players understand that, because they know that, hey, we're still in the position. I'm sure, even though the Paraguay FA is kind of thinking to themselves, hey, we're at least still in the position to qualify. It's not as easy as you think. I mean, you still have other teams going out there. Chile, okay, they didn't score a single goal, but they've looked good as well. You never know what could happen to teams like Ecuador, which just sacked their coach Felix Sanchez Vaz. Maybe they'll have a drop. So, it's not the end of the world per se for Paraguay, but I think it's going to be much more difficult moving forward. And I think, looking at this, and I want to go to Fede on this one, there's going to be some players that I think after this tournament, you have to make a decision to not use them, or on a more extreme circumstance, see what happens in the U23 team. We'll talk about that next week when we go into our Olympic coverage, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of players on that team that after, and I don't know if you guys saw the game against France, obviously they lost 4-1, but you see some of those performances and you're thinking to yourself, okay, wait a minute. If these guys can do it against Premier League players or teams that are players that are from established top 5 teams, even though they lost, but had better performances than what we saw in the Copa America, you're trying to think to yourself, maybe it's their time to do something. Look at Costa Rica, for example. They're obviously going to have a World Cup qualifying process to go qualify for 2026, but they were the youngest team in the entire Copa America, and they gave Paraguay a good battle. And I think there are going to be some players that I think on this Paraguay team, be it from what Jara Salier is putting in or from other teams as well, you think to yourself, maybe it's their time. It's their time to do something rather than going for the experienced players like a Gustavo Gomez, a Junior Alonso, even a Fabian Balbuena, who obviously got the captaincy, but certainly wasn't all right. But there are some players out there that are in your kind of mid 20s, early 20s, or even younger than that where you think to yourself, that's the core players that I want to look for, because those that are in your like your 30 range or a bit more older, they're not the ones to trust anymore. I want to go to Ralph on this one. If Ralph, if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to look at the Olympic team and see what they do. But it is a lot. It is very different to go from under 23s to suddenly playing, senior side. But we saw some good performances last night. That's true, despite the defeat. The problem is it's so hard to tell because we don't know who's coming in as a new coach. And what new coaches will often do is say, well, just because Garnero couldn't get on with Gustavo Gomez, I can get the best out of him. And a lot of coaches have that kind of arrogance or that confidence, maybe is a better word, that they can do that. So it's hard to tell because depending on who comes in, you might just see some of these names recycled and coming back in. And that's what's happened, by the way, with the changes of coaches. You've seen the same group of players just get recycled and used over and over again. So it's hard to tell until we know who's coming in, where they will go and what direction in terms of player choice.
Yeah, and I think as well, I think, when you look at it from a perspective of how it's going to happen, we got Fede back. Sorry about that. But Fede, I don't know if you were able to listen to what I had to say beforehand, but just your thoughts on like just some of these players that we've always been accustomed to seeing, where it's like, thanks for your service, even though it probably didn't work out the best as you could. Let's look at the young blood of what we saw from maybe the U23 or from anyone else that's coming up that didn't get a chance yet.
Yeah, it's been very frustrating to see these guys try one time over another. But I do think that frustration is kind of carried into the next players that have tried to build something in this locker room. And they're kind of holding us back also in that sense. So yeah, I do think it is time for the younger players, especially after what we saw from the players from this Olympic team. I mean, we're going to see only, I believe, 18 in this final cut, in this final list, but I believe there's over 30, 35, maybe even 40 players that are really ready to try to make something. And we got to follow their career. We got to see if they make that next step, which has probably been the hardest part for the Paraguayan football players lately that have tried to go to Europe and establish themselves. Even Diego Gonzalez, who's gonna get an opportunity now, the Lazio player. I mean, he hasn't been playing in the first team yet, so you think he's not ready for the national team, for the senior national team, but he's already playing in Europe. He's getting that training. So we need those kind of players. I believe we need to give opportunities to young defenders also. I mean, why not call a couple of young players that are in Russia, like Alexis Duarte, like Fernandez, who was called up, I believe, for that friendly against Russia, but didn't get an opportunity in the Copa America. There's a whole bunch of names, Roberto. We're going to follow their careers. Hopefully they make that next step that we need them to make. As of right, I think we're competitive enough, and we're falling behind. We're falling behind in the South American football, as you can see. I mean, the standings don't lie right now in the qualifiers. That's where we're at football wise.
Also, the FIFA rankings, just something quickly, because I checked against Costa Rica. I was like, wow, we lost to another team below us in the rankings. Costa Rica is actually ranked higher than Paraguay right now. So we finished where the FIFA rankings suggested we'd finish in that group, which kind of also points to a reality of where we are at the moment.
I think it's a bitter taste, and I think we want to also talk about a subject that I think certainly a lot of people have always had their frustration on, but also towards Robert Haddison, Ralph. I mean, a lot of people have looked at this era that he's had in the managers that he's had during his tenure. Ramon Diaz, Chiqui Arce, uh, you had Moninigo there, but it was only for a few games. Juan Carlos Osorio, the whole fiasco that happened there. Eduardo Berizzo, Guillermo Barros Queloto, and now Danny Garnero. 7 different coaches in the last 8 years. It's gonna be an 8th one in that time. So yeah, you're literally going for a manager once, by that comparison, once every year. And you're not having a process. You're not respecting a process of what a normal manager can do, is, respecting your 4 years of your tenure and trying to do well there. I know it's going to be a very hard ask, and I think that would be a huge gift from the Paraguay fans to see that happening. But When do you feel like, I think Robert Harrison has to come in and be like, he has to take the blame for this, him and his fellow directors, the people that are in charge of running the game. I don't want to go into a big conversation on that, but you just think to yourself, after more failures, after constant failures, it's just at that point where you just point the fingers of the people who are in charge of the FA as well.
Yeah, but the problem with Harrison is that no one wants to go up against him, and it's not because he's some kind of like strongman leader that people are scared of. It's just because no one wants the job. We're talking about no one wants the Paraguay job. No one wants to be the president of the FA. So he recently actually said he wasn't going to continue, but then as no one was going to stand against him, he just was reelected. Maybe I think the pressure is actually more on Justo Villar because he's in charge. He's like the sporting director, so he's more, I would say, tasked with finding the right candidates for the job. And you can see if they keep getting these new managers in and they're not the right one, then eventually is it the person that's picking them is not making the right decision. So maybe more of the pressure is going to be on Justo Villar, but at the same time, he's very linked to Harrison. So you kind of feel that Harrison's not going to throw him to the wolves. Let's say he's going to keep him and keep this process going. So I mean, sure, there might be pressure, but where does that pressure really come from? The pressure would only come if somebody else with significant power and influence in Paraguayan football said, well, I want this job. And at the moment, nobody wants it, I think, because of what they've seen. But there's a good point, just to pick up, there are lots of conditions there. So the managers shouldn't have excuses. The salary, Garnero's salary is up there. It's like more than Berhalter in the US, just as a comparison for people listening. They've just done the Cardiff, so the new high performance center for youth players. They did the women's last year, right? Or 18 months ago. There's a lot of like things have been happening, infrastructure coming in around. So any coach coming in doesn't have that much excuse either. I mean, it really is on picking, I think, the right person to do the job. And then, like you said, is he maybe too trigger happy, Harrison, in getting rid of coaches? Like, I'm kind of glad we didn't stay with Berizzo, but let's just say that Berizzo was still in charge today. Would we be in any different situation? Maybe not, right? So there is maybe a question of him having a bit more trust in who he's going to pick next.
Yeah, he speaks so many wrong coaches. I mean, we could talk about coaches that have even managed just one game and left the job. That's obviously on him. I do think his biggest responsibility, though, is on the local league. It's on what they do with the local players, how they haven't been able to sell players to Europe. I mean, Julio Enciso and what happened with Diego Gomez lately was just something totally out of the blue and something totally different from what we've seen. Also, Enzo Gonzalez, I would say, going to Wolverhampton, but it's been something totally different from what we expected would happen, because Olimpia is not doing good things in the youth league. Cerro Porteño is probably the team that's contributing more players now to the national team, but they're not playing in Europe yet. I mean, they make the leap to Argentina, they make the leap to Brazil, but they don't make the leap to Brazil, to Europe, and that's where we need our players to be. I mean, this is something that we've been talking about for years, and they haven't done that job, with FIFA agents or just building those players, maybe mentally, physically ready. I don't know. I think it's a combination of a little bit of everything to get those players. Why does Uruguay have the players that they have right now? Because they did the job. Why does Venezuela have the players that they have now in their national team? Because they did. They got a generation together. They built it from scratch. Then we need to do that again. We need to start from scratch. And I do think that the what Ralph was mentioning with the new training grounds and everything, they're building the future of the Paraguayan football. But currently, we're not sitting in a good place.
No, we're not. We're not sitting in a good place, and I think it's only going to get, as long as we don't see that, it probably will get worse. We'll have to see what happens to the Paraguay national team moving forward. As I said, the next games are not till September, until the games against Uruguay and Brazil at home. We'll have to wait and see who's in charge, who's going to come in, how the Paraguay team will do in Paris. Obviously, that's at least the one hope that you have. At least if we're gonna close on a more positive note, you'd say, Fede, at least we have that U23 team, which I got to tell you, man, given the circumstances that they've been going through and kind of the way that they haven't been able to get one player over the age of 23, if this team goes really far and goes for a medal, I mean, that will be a remarkable achievement in itself.
No, I think it will shock a lot of people, especially with the huge problems that they had to build this team. But it's still pretty much the base of what we saw in the Sudamericano, right? I mean, the team that led us to the championship. So maybe they can build that bond again. There's a lot of players that haven't gotten maybe as much minutes as they wanted these last couple of months in their clubs. I do think these last three friendlies are going to be very important just to see how strong we can get. And then you have Fabricio Peralta, Diego Gomez that are going to come in kind of late, when the team is already ready and prepared for the competition. But there's a spot waiting for both of those players, I believe, in the starting team. And hopefully we see a couple of bright spots from the new players. I mean, there was a couple of slots that opened up for certain players. I mentioned Diego Gonzalez. I think Thiago Caballero from Nacional also is a new player that wasn't on the list in the Sudamericano. So yeah, we're definitely gonna have to preview this a bit more. We got to talk about that list. We got to talk about every single player. Alexis Cantero. There's a whole bunch of players that I really like on this list that I hope they can develop and use this Olympics as a platform to get them to the next stage. I want to see most of these players not playing the local league. I want to see them going to Europe and hopefully having them on the senior national team not far from now.
Yeah, I mean, Ralph, just to close it off here, we obviously saw the game against France. Obviously didn't get the win that they got, but at least there are some signs of positive in comparison to what we saw in the Copa America from Granny Garnedo and his players.
Yeah, for one, there's a much more united group of players that have really not just done the Sudamericano. Some of them played, remember, when they did the games in the Odesur games in Paraguay. So some of that group were even together then. And so they've come through a lot of youth levels together, which is totally different to say Julian Cesar never played youth football pretty much for Paraguay because he just came straight in. Ramon Sosa, I think, similar because he was like a late bloomer. So they didn't have some of that like winning together as kids, whereas this group obviously have that chance. And I mean, yeah, the way they went toe to toe with France I mean, they took the lead, and then really until halftime, they were just going at it. They were very intense, very aggressive. The physicality maybe wore off towards the end, and that's why you see the two late goals. But honestly, if they can be doing that against Mali, Japan, Israel, you would expect them to get through their group. But we're going to talk more about that later. But I think there's definitely some positives for Paraguay looking at that team.
Absolutely. We'll have all the coverage that we'll give you for those Olympics in the next coming weeks as we close out.
Are you going to Paris, Roberto?
Yes, I am. I am going to be there. So we'll have more coverage on that, just like we did in the Copa America. We will do it here in Paris as well. I'll be at the ground for the 3 group stage games, and hopefully Paraguay will be able to advance and have more luck in comparison to what we saw in the United States. So obviously take a look at that coverage coming very, very soon as we gear up and go full Olympic mode. This is certainly a prestigious tournament like the Copa America has been, but this one is special. The 3rd time that Paraguay will be participating in a football tournament in the Olympics. 92, the first time in Barcelona. 04, they got the silver medal with Jara Salier. He's back for the ones in Paris. We'll see what happens there as we close out another great episode of Guarani Vision. For myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hannah, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.